You're listening to The Voluntary Life, where you can hear ideas for finding freedom in an unfree world. Visit thevoluntarylife.com to connect with the show and hear all past episodes. Here's your host, Jake.
Hi everyone, it's Jake here. Welcome to The Voluntary Life. In this episode, I'm going to share with you part 1 of the audiobook of my book, Negotiate for Mutual Profit. This is the audiobook of a short guide that I wrote about negotiation. In this episode, you're going to hear part 1 of the book, which is all about the communication side of negotiation. In part 2 of the book, I write about the dynamics of negotiation and strategy and tactics. If you would like to read the whole book, you can get it for free by joining my mailing list, and I will put a copy of the link for that in the show notes. And if you'd like to get hold of the entire audiobook, you can get that by becoming a supporter of The Voluntary Life on Patreon. Or if you prefer, you can also get it by becoming a backer of The Voluntary Life on Bitbacker, which is a cryptocurrency alternative to Patreon. I've already shared the whole of the audiobook on Patreon. It's in bonus episodes 6 and 7, and I've already shared it on Bitbacker too. Before we get to the audiobook, I want to say a big thank you to my new supporters. Thank you to my new patron on Patreon, John F. John, I like your icon. It's my favorite Banksy picture. Also want to say thank you to my new backer on Bitbacker, Inklab, who also has a nice icon, and I know that that's because Inklab is a graphic designer. So thank you very much to my new supporters. Another quick bit of news regarding Bitbacker. It seems like Bitbacker is having some teething problems with monthly transactions, and I've had a couple of emails from people who support me who seem to be having some problems with the system. I have got in touch with the guy who runs Bitbacker as well, and I know that my backers have too. Hopefully we'll get that all sorted out. One thing I have done to try and make things easier for those who would prefer to support me using cryptocurrency is to set up a special offer on Bitbacker. With this special offer, you get a 30% discount if you sign up for a year. And that way, you don't have to do the cryptocurrency transactions each month. If you would like to support me for a year, that would be great. And I hope the discount helps. But also, if you prefer to support me month to month, I really appreciate that too. So that's all for the news. Here's part 1 of my audiobook, Negotiate for Mutual Profit. Negotiate for Mutual Profit by Jake DeSillis. Read by Jake DeSillis. Introduction. Any business arrangement that is not profitable to the other fellow will in the end prove unprofitable for you. The bargain that yields mutual satisfaction is the only one that is apt to be repeated. B.C. Forbes. This guide is about how to negotiate in a voluntary relationship. The approach of win-win negotiation is appropriate for any situation in which you and another person freely seek some agreement. For all of us who don't initiate aggression, negotiation is the basis of all our relationships and the only way to get what we need from other people. We negotiate every day with family members, business contacts, friends, and romantic partners. This guide will help you be conscious about your negotiations by giving you a framework of principles to use. Some people imagine that to be a skillful negotiator, you have to be able to dominate the other side and somehow bully them into submission. This idea is based on the false premise that only one side of a negotiation can win and the other side must lose. Hence it is referred to as win-lose negotiation. The approach set forward in this guide allows both you and the person you are negotiating with to benefit. That's why it's called win-win. 2 fundamental truths of economics make it possible to make a deal that benefits both sides. There is no fixed amount of wealth in the world, and each person values things differently. Win-win negotiation is a way of getting what you need from the people in your life while nurturing your relationships with them. Win-win negotiation is also the best way to minimize the risk of deals going wrong. You cannot rely on the legal system to enforce agreements. Using the court system is extremely expensive, stressful, and fraught with uncertainties. Making agreements that work for both sides massively reduces the risk of falling out. The power of win-win negotiation is that, by design, everyone has a vested interest in following through. About me. When I became an entrepreneur, I realized 2 things about negotiation. Firstly, I would have to negotiate every day, and secondly, I didn't have a clue what I was doing. So I read as much as I could on the subject. I learned some powerful principles from business-oriented books about negotiation, such as what determines negotiating strength and how high-value outcomes are created. Although business negotiation books emphasize how important the people issue is in any negotiation, they often deal with communication quite superficially. Outside my business, I ran a psychology book club and podcast for many years, as I enjoy learning about psychology. I found the most useful techniques for communication in books about psychology. This guide brings together the best insights on win-win negotiation from both business and psychology. I've only included ideas that I have tested and found useful in my own experience as a negotiator. Negotiation is an art that requires practice, and the ideas in this guide are only a starting point for you to practice yourself. However, you can use this framework to negotiate with anyone in your life. I have found the approach helpful in getting agreement on issues as small as arranging dinner and as big as multi-million-dollar business deals. About this guide. Negotiating win-win outcomes requires 4 different capabilities. Number 1, you need to have good people skills. How you relate to others is a vital aspect of negotiation. We'll look at constructive communication first, since it's arguably the most important skill in negotiating. Number 2, you need a method to follow in order to reach your goal. In this guide, I'll outline the best practice method for win-win negotiation. Number 3, you need an understanding of the deep principles that underlie every negotiation. 2 of the most powerful principles are presented in this guide. If you learn to apply them, you can become a negotiation ninja. Number 4. Lastly, it helps to have good habits about negotiating. At the end of this guide, I will suggest 2 of the habits that work best for me. Constructive communication. How you relate to others in negotiation is just as important as the substance of what you are negotiating. Your success in negotiation depends on your having the skills to empathize and communicate constructively with the other people involved. Without these skills, understanding of negotiation dynamics is useless. Therefore, communication is, in its own right, a vital part of every negotiation. Negotiate ground rules and content. You are always undertaking 2 negotiations at the same time. One is the negotiation about how to negotiate, that is, what the rules are, and the other is the negotiation about substance. The tricky thing is that the rules of how to negotiate are often unspoken. They tend to evolve unconsciously as you go. Often we rely on social conventions, habits, or patterns from our own past. The key is to consciously negotiate about how to communicate with each other. This means agreeing how you're going to treat each other during the negotiation and what the ground rules are. If things go wrong, you need to stop arguing about the substance. Instead, start by getting agreement on how to talk about it first. For example, if communication breaks down, you can seek agreement on the principle that everyone should have a chance to speak. You can agree on ways to make that possible, for example by taking turns to speak without interruptions. These kind of agreements are all about how you're going to negotiate, not about the substance of the argument. If you tackle that question first, you can get back to a productive negotiation. In the heat of the moment, I find it hard to remember that there are always 2 negotiations going on. However, when I do pursue both negotiations consciously, I always get better results. Empathy. The method of win-win negotiation depends on understanding the interests of the person you are negotiating with. This understanding is a prerequisite to successful outcomes. You can only understand the other person's interests if you are able to empathize with them. You need to be able to see the negotiation from their eyes. This does not mean that you also have to sympathize with their interests, but you at least need to understand them. Use the active listening technique to empathize with your negotiation partner. This means listening to all their concerns, not just what they want in the negotiation, but also how they feel, what they think, and anything that seems important to them. Once they have gotten everything off their chest, you summarize what you've heard back to them in your own words. This is done without any agreement or disagreement from you, but simply to ensure and demonstrate that you fully understand and empathize with them. Active listening is a great way to gain a better understanding of the deeper interests that your partner is trying to satisfy in the negotiation. This is how you get past their specific positions in the negotiation to understand what they really need. If you communicate that your intention is to understand, not judge, you can ask questions to more fully understand where the person is coming from. Start the process by truly listening without interruption or argument to everything that the other person has to say about what they want, think, and feel. Just listening to someone feels to them like a gift, but it is also extremely helpful to you as it gives you the necessary information for the negotiation. Once they have the satisfaction of feeling truly listened to and understood, they are much more likely to be open to listening to you in turn. Communication. In order to facilitate win-win negotiation, you must communicate as peers in an adult-to-adult style of conversation. This means avoiding getting drawn into any communication that has hidden undertones. For example, someone might say something in a way that seems to be telling you off, as if you were a child and they were a displeased parent. Or they might act like an angry child and speak to you as if you were their unfair parent. In his book, Games People Play, psychologist Eric Berne describes how authentic communication can be undermined by such psychological games and provides lots of suggestions for how to avoid them. Sometimes bringing undertones to the surface by addressing them can improve communication by helping you understand the other person. In short, avoid getting sucked in, make all communication explicit, and bring the communication style back to a straightforward, adult-to-adult dialogue. Communicating as peers does not mean that you cannot express your emotions or that you have to speak blandly. It means that emotions are expressed in a straightforward way. You express your emotions in the way an authentic person does, as a statement of fact about yourself, not as a negotiation ploy. If emotions are expressed, the key is not to let them escalate a dispute and to avoid situations where people are so flooded with their feelings that they're not able to think rationally. You can go back to using active listening to acknowledge whatever is being expressed without agreeing or escalating it. You can also slow the escalation by taking a break, especially if you or anyone else is feeling flooded and needs time to calm down. Speaking for yourself. In win-win negotiation, communication is always more effective if you speak for yourself and not about the other person. There is a strong temptation to talk about what the other person is doing. For example, at times you might want to show them the error of their ways or tell them how unreasonable they are being. It's totally legitimate to be assertive about your needs and your boundaries, but the way you communicate assertiveness is crucial. The key is to express your interests without blaming or shaming the other person. The psychologist Thomas Gordon describes a communication technique called iMessages, which is very useful in negotiation. An iMessage communicates your concerns with a sentence that starts with I and not you. Messages that start with you put the listener on the defensive. For example, when someone hears you are being unreasonable, they hear blame and shame, which primes them for conflict, not negotiation. However, you can express your needs while keeping it about yourself by simply saying something like, I don't want that. Here is a more detailed example. Quote, if I were to agree to that suggestion, it would contradict many of my core values. I feel angry when I think about that. Unquote. The technique of speaking for yourself and not about the other person applies to requests as well. A request signifies that you're trying to meet your needs and does not suggest any judgment of what the other person should do. If you imply that someone ought to change their behavior, they will become defensive. However, if you request that they do something to help you, and demonstrate that you are willing to help them in return, then you can engage them in a constructive way. Marshall Rosenberg's book, Nonviolent Communication, has more suggestions about how to make requests that are framed in terms of meeting your needs and not in terms of demanding that the other person change.
Thank you for listening to The Voluntary Life. If you like this podcast, please show your support by becoming a patron of The Voluntary Life on Patreon. Your support will help to grow and improve the show And you'll get access to a treasure trove of rewards, including bonus episodes. Visit thevoluntarylife.com to learn more.